Hey, welcome to week 4, the sociological imagination and human rights policing. We are just coming out of another great week where we talk about the importance of human agency and we relate human agency to human rights policing. And so, again, great discussions. I think we had some really good stories in the discussion board of how many of the class participants utilized their human agency, a lot of reflection on some of of your past experiences, as well as some good discussions on the creation of folk devils through moral panics and how this can be as a threat to human rights policing. And again, a lot of reflection there. So I think there's a lot of good, positive discussion going on. And I certainly hope and trust everyone is reading the comments that I post, that my father posts, and that you post to one another. That's a very big, important part of this class, again, is learning all from one another. And so all the comments that you provide to your colleagues, I think goes a really long way. And the sharing of all of your experiences, that's, again, a big part of the learning process in this course of how to advance human rights policing. And so in the week 4 introduction module, I already provide a nice overview of what we've done in the first 3 weeks. And then I talk about what we're doing this week in week 4. And so I'll touch a little bit upon it here. And so the beginning of the module takes you to this idea of the sociological imagination and what this has to do with human rights policing. And so in many ways, it's an invitation to the sociological imagination. And one really shouldn't think that, I'm advancing the sociological imagination, to advance, the discipline of academia. It's not so much, or the discipline of sociology, rather. It's not so much that, I think sociology is important. I think that sociological imagination has become much more important than just a field of sociology, because it's a particular way of thinking. It's a way of understanding the world from beyond the private orbit of your own life. It allows us to transcend our own experiences. It allows us to understand how people are able to navigate their biography from within a cultural milieu that's responding to their structural conditions and their structural problems, all occurring within a historical context. And so there's almost a 4 unit of analysis and how we're thinking of social phenomenon, looking at the person, the individual, their cultural milieu, and how that cultural milieu is responding to their collectively experienced structural problems, all within a historical context. And so I even give examples of how to use that sociological imagination when understanding things like homelessness or even crime. And then I connect all this back to what this can mean for human rights policing, and how can we understand the personal troubles of the individual and connect it to the structural issues that people face. And so that sociological imagination is connecting the individual to their to their institutions, connecting the individual to their historical circumstance. And it becomes very important to make that connection in order to understand the individual. And then I move on to another section called Verstehen, which is another important part of the sociological imagination. And it was the sociologist Max Weber who spoke about the importance of using Verstehen, or understanding the world through the actor's point of view, seeing the world through their lenses, through their reality, through their goggles. And only when we can see the world from the actor's point of view can we fully understand their own experiences. And so we have to put ourselves not only in their shoes, but also in their structural circumstances as well, in order to see how they gauge reality and how they make decisions through their own terrains. And so, again, this will all be an invitation for you as a police officer, as law enforcement agents and criminal justice professionals, to think with that sociological imagination. It's not an imagination that belongs just to the sociologist or the criminologist. I think it's a way to view the world that helps us understand the world in ways that would be impossible with just our own limited experiences. And so I think that using the sociological imagination is not only important for academics, but also for police officers, but also just everyday people to understand their world and their own historical circumstances. And I can say, in all honesty, it's this sociological imagination that attracted me to sociology. It's motivated the books and the research that I've done. And in many ways, outside of academia, outside of career or job or any of that nonsense, it's made my life just more meaningful. And so I really hope that you take this idea, this constant sociological imagination seriously, and think about how it can inform your own thinking about the world, including in your own jobs as well as law enforcement professionals. Then I go on to, I think, a very important part where I talk about the importance of storytelling, and I discuss how human beings are storytelling animals, and it's how we develop our own identity. And I give an example from Benedict Anderson, another famous sociologist, who brings up the idea of the photo, and that here we have a photo that we look at ourselves as a baby, and then we see ourselves as an adult. And this baby is this weird, mysterious, strange thing. And so in order to connect ourselves to that photo, we have to construct a story that, yes, this is me when I was born in Detroit. And then my parents got divorced and I moved to Wisconsin, where I went to this high school. Then I fell in love for the first time. And then I went to college. And so you tell this story to construct a narrative to make sense of that baby and to connect it to who you are now. And so storytelling then becomes very important for human beings, where we literally speak our reality into existence and make it real. And so I even make the argument that storytelling is a human right. It's a right for people to convey their own experiences, to tell their own stories, to have control over the narratives of their own lives, and how important that is. And then I also talk about how we as academics and also as journalists and news media, how we take away people's right to tell their own story, and we tell people's stories for them. I can't tell you how many times, academics and criminologists and sociologists write about gang members and criminals without ever talking to any of them, without knowing them, without knowing their communities, without knowing where they come from, without going to their churches, to their community organizations, to dinner with them. We don't even know their zip codes. And so we write these elaborate theories of people without knowing anything about them. And the same is true for police officers. People write about police officers without really knowing what they do, without really knowing where police officers come from, without getting to know them as well, and participating in their lives and in their own police work as well. And so it becomes in a very colonizing process where people tell the story of others. And so one of my arguments is that people need the right to tell their own stories. And I think if we're going to ameliorate some of the negative stories people have said about police, we can only do so in ways that are within our control. And that's where we connected back to human rights policing. Here's a chance for police officers to tell their own story about their police work. And I think through this human rights policing lens, police officers can tell that story and take control of their narrative and change public perceptions. I think this could be good for police and the community. And so please read those sections. I think they're very important. And I bring it all the way to storytelling and the double consciousness. And so pay particular attention to that, because it's that storytelling, the double consciousness, that's going to relate to part one of the discussion board, where you're going to talk about your experiences, and I'll get to that in a second. And then we're going to end where my father talks about, I think, a very powerful story of him policing a foreign community. Here we have an immigrant coming into this country, graduates college without really knowing the language, still making it through the university, and then becoming a police officer, and for the first time discovering a community and a world that he knew nothing about. So I won't say much more about it because my father tells the story beautifully and very eloquently. And so, but it talks a lot about how he was able to use that sociological imagination to make sense of his own world, and how that helped him, because after all, he graduated in college with a degree in sociology, and so he was able to use that to make sense of the world that he was navigating, and he even reflects upon that today. So very good, very powerful story. So your discussion board will have to do with the double consciousness. It's W.B. Du Bois's concept of the double consciousness, the feelings of two-ness, and what this has to do with human rights policing. And I'll ask you the questions, how do you tell stories that turn others into the inferior? How do you make people feel like outsiders? How often do you other people based on some category? And we all do this, so it's not picking on police officers. Academics, probably do this more than anyone. But we all do this, and this has been done to police as well, who have been othered. And so human beings do this. And I think instead of pretending that we don't, just to admit that, yeah, we've done this a lot. We've othered people. We've made other people feel like they're the inferior, or they're the outsiders, or the other. I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it. And so I think just being cognizant of that and talking about that openly, and discussing how this can advance the goals of human rights policing is, I think, essential and an important task of this class, an important lesson of this class. So I really look forward to what y'all are going to discuss in that first part of the discussion board. And the second part is, I'm hoping that you can take time to interview just a member of the community, preferably somebody you've had a negative interaction with, and just get their story, learn how they view the world from their own positionality, learn their view of the world from their own perspective. And I think that goes a long way if we can just start listening to people, talking to people, but not just listening and talking, but seeing the world from their point of view, seeing how the decisions that they had to face within the structural conditions and the structural problems that they had to face as well. And so really understanding the world from the actor's point of view becomes very important. And I've learned from doing my own research that if I expect people to talk about themselves and express their own vulnerabilities, I have to do the same. I have to expose my vulnerabilities to people as well, tell my story with them if I'm going to expect the same in return. But keep in mind, when you hear the stories of others, that, and I talk about it in the lectures, people often internalize the logic of oppression. They oftentimes believe the stories that other people tell about them. So, for example, a lot of times poor people might say, oh, well, I'm just, lazy, or I just don't want to work, or I just didn't care about school. That's often not true. They are oftentimes hard workers, and they did care about school, but for some reason became alienated and excluded from the education process. They felt disempowered because of it, and then maybe gave up on a process. There's a lot of reasons, but a lot of times people just internalize that logic of oppression. They internalize the logic other people give about their own lives, and they come to believe it themselves. And so it's important to be very cognizant of that when we try to understand the world from the actor's point of view, how they came to develop the notions and their understandings about themselves, how they developed a particular type of narrative to engage in their own storytelling about their life. So if you can, interview with a community member and try to understand the world from their point of view. And you can, preferably it'll be a new kind of interview that you have with a community member, but you can also recall a past experience where you've gotten to know someone and you're able to hear their story from their point of view. And so, yeah, what I'm hoping you can do is talk to a community member and to listen to their story from their point of view and how they make sense of their own world. And so I think that'll be very powerful, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to talk with someone in a meaningful way. And then you'll discuss that in what you found in that discussion board. The instructions are laid out very well in the discussion board activity, the prompt for it. Okay, and so just a heads up for week 5, there'll be less of a lecture, a little bit, but less of a reading. It's more going to be about, we're watching a documentary called 13th. You could probably find it online now if you want to get a jump start on it. It's called the 13th Amendment, or the 13th, and it's about the criminal justice system. But I'll have a link for you. Again, you can Google it and find it pretty easily yourself on probably on YouTube even. But then I'm going to ask you to go out and interview members of a community organization about how they view human rights policing. In other words, what does human rights policing look like from their perspective? And so those are stories that you're going to share in the next discussion board. And then week 6 is all going to be about applying the lessons and some of the things that we've discussed throughout the semester, applying human rights policing to your own police work while you've been taking this course. And so think about that as you're interacting with people of, have you applied human rights policing? Have you applied some of the ideas that we've discussed in this class to your work so far while taking this class? Have you applied any of the articles in the Declaration of Human Rights and other documents we've discussed to your police work? And if so, how so? And so that's what's coming up next. But meanwhile, please enjoy this week. I think you're really going to like it. I think you're going to like some of the readings. And I hope that you're enjoying the class. I hope you're getting a lot out of it. As always, feel free to email my father or I. And so I think things are going really well so far. Any concerns, please just reach out to me for anything. But so far, this has been, at least from my angle, very positive experience, such very reflective and thoughtful stories and posts that y'all have given so far. So keep up the excellent work. And yeah, I'll see you on the discussion board. Thank you so much.